Well, good evening, everyone. I am Anita Astorino-Kulik, and I have the privilege of representing the 45th Legislative District in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. I am truly honored to be here tonight to introduce the Andrew Carnegie Free Library and Music Halls program, The Woman's Hour, 100 years and counting. I had the privilege of growing up in Carnegie, and the Carnegie is my library. Back in December, I had a wonderful conversation with the executive director of the library, Maggie Forbes. Maggie and I talked about this day, and we had wonderful plans put in place to have a reception, a grand program, and then COVID set in. So we're going to have our wonderful program tonight, but we don't have the food and we don't have the wine. But ladies, for all of those of you joining us, we're going to ask you, hey, pour yourself a glass of wine, relax tonight. We have an excellent panel for you to hear from tonight. So a few things. Tonight we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. And very quickly, most of us would term that as when women were given the right to vote, but we know from our history that none of the rights enumerated in our Constitution were just given. All the rights we cherish were fought for, and no less was our right to vote. When we adopted our Constitution in 1787, we adopted it as a living document that could be changed with the times through the amendment process. And even back in the 1700s, women like Abigail Adams cautioned her husband and other officials to not forget the women. And prior to 1920, remember, women were on the battlefields during the Revolutionary War and the Civil War, and they stood with the soldiers during World War I. And during the Industrial Revolution, women were spending 6 days a week for penny wages in the factories. So it's nothing short of baffling that it took until 1920, a time that is considered part of our modern era, for women to be able to cast a vote in a national election. The brave women who fought this battle suffered shaming, abuse, and imprisonment, all for the ability to have a voice in their government. Back when I took office in 2016, I was the only woman in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives from the Allegheny County delegation. Now, there were women before me, but in 2016, I was the only one. In a matter of 2 years to the 2018 election, I was joined by 5 more women. That's an incredible raise. And they're women from both sides of the aisle. They're wonderful, and we all work very well together. And I know that that number is only going to grow in the upcoming elections. Thanks to the caliber of the panel of speakers I'm about to introduce, I have every confidence that working together, we will bring about the vision of enfranchisement and equality for which our foremothers so valiantly fought. So let's meet this evening's panelists. Jessica Benham is the Democratic candidate for the 36th Legislative District for the House of Representatives. Dr. Dana Brown is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Center for Women and Politics at Chatham University. Monica Ruiz-Caraballo is the Executive Director of Casa San Jose, located in Beachview, and Ciora Thomas is the founder and president of Sisters Pittsburgh. And I now turn the program over to this evening's moderator, Dr. Jessie Ramey, the founding director of the Women's Institute at Chatham University.
Thank you so much, Representative Kulik. It was delightful to have you with us this evening as well. And congratulations on busting one of those gender ceilings that I know that we're going to be talking about this evening. There's a reason actually that we're gathering today on August 18th. So I thought that before we launch into our panel, I was actually asked just to give sort of a very quick framework for why today, what's up with August 18th. And so if you ask a historian a history question, you know, you can get a long answer. I'm going to give you the very short version of this history. But way back in June of 1919, what was then called the Susan B. Anthony Amendment actually came up for a vote in the US Senate for the 5th time. That was not the first time it had been introduced. It had already been approved by the House of Representatives. And the 19th Amendment, of course, would go on to establish women's access to the vote. But first, the amendment had to be ratified by 2/3 of the states. So the race was really on throughout 1919 and into 1920 to get 36 states. And by the summer of 1920, things were really heating up. We already had 35 states had voted yes, but several had voted no. And it's important to note that activists were really doing this work. And a lot of these activists were women of color, specifically Black women, and a lot of queer women working on this all over the country. There were only 48 states then. So they had to get 36 votes. And this was, of course, not going to be the first time that women had access to the vote, because 27 of those states had already granted some form of voting rights to women. So there was a lot of action on the ground, a lot of activity, a lot of activism, a lot of networks that these women called upon to do this work of trying to get the ratification process. So by the summer of 1920, in August, all eyes are actually on the state of Tennessee, which might seem sort of unlikely to cast the winning vote. With its position in the South was not particularly favorable to women's voting rights. But there were some hopeful signs. So suffragists and anti-suffragists from all over the country descended on Nashville in August of 1920. And there were 2 factions, and they actually very helpfully wore roses in their lapels to distinguish them. So if you were for suffrage, you wore a yellow rose. And if you were an anti-suffragist, you wore a red rose. And the vote came up to the floor of the legislature in Tennessee, and it was not looking good when a man wearing a red rose, right? So he's an anti-suffragist by the name of Harry Burns, actually got a letter from his mother, Phoebe, telling him to be a good boy and vote the right way for suffrage. And that was the swing vote that actually changed the course of the vote in Tennessee. That's how we got to 36 states to ratify the 19th Amendment. And that is what, of course, we're commemorating today on August 18th, 100 years ago, that happened. But just as that day was not the beginning of the story for voting rights, it was not the end either. And this is a really important part of what we're going to be talking about tonight, which is that particularly for women of color and Black and brown women in particular, it took years and other measures before all women had access to the right to vote. And we're going to talk about tonight the fact that all women still don't have access to the vote. And in particular, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which is sort of one of the signature pieces of civil rights legislation, maybe the most effective piece of civil rights legislation in this country, finally gave Black women access to the vote. So tonight we're also commemorating 55 years since the signing of that legislation, which was actually just 2 weeks ago on August 6th, 1965. So this story is ongoing. What we're talking about this evening is sort of a midpoint in a very long story of suffrage. And as we've seen recently, there have been numerous attempts over the last years to roll back voting rights in all kinds of ways that inevitably disproportionately impact women. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight as well, while we commemorate 100 years since that day in Tennessee, and the ratification of the 19th Amendment, and of course the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act. And let's get on to talking about a little bit about what voting looks like today. We're going to ask some questions of our panelists. You've already heard a very short introduction of who they are, but I am so excited to share this panel with you. These are some pretty incredible people. I know each of them and the work that they do here in our community, and I'm delighted to be sharing this panel with all of them. So again, panelists, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. We're just sort of going to go round robin on some of these questions and give you a chance to answer. But let's start with, you know, we've got this very intersectional panel of communities leaders with us here this evening. So let's start by hearing from each of you about what you do. If you could just perhaps take a minute to tell us about your work and maybe why voting matters to the people in the communities that you work with. So we'll just do this sort of alphabetically at first, and then we can tackle it in a different order. But Jessica, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start. So I'm Jessica Benham, and before I ran for office, I was the Director of Development at the Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy, which is a local organization run by and for autistic people, and it is one of the few of its kind. And the work that we did there was different from the work that other autism nonprofits did because it was centered on our lived experience and using our lived experience to serve our own community. So we did everything from making sure that people had supports and services to connecting them with resources, to doing public policy work. And for me and for people in my community, the reason why voting is important is because so often our concerns are not heard when it comes to public policy. I know as an autistic person who spent a lot of time trying to get elected officials all the way from school board to borough council and on up to listen to the concerns of our community, that elected officials aren't always inclined to listen to people like me. And certainly, in my community, as a white person who has had a lot of education in my life, I'm relatively privileged. And so if they're not inclined to listen to me, then I know that they're certainly not listening to people in my community who are even more marginalized than I am. And so I never thought that I would run for office. I didn't think that that was a job that people like me did. I certainly, wasn't really looking around and seeing people with my lived experience run for office and win. And yet, I know now and I see now that there are many people with disabilities and, a few folks who are autistic who've run for office. And I'm excited if I win in November to join their ranks because voting matters, especially when people like me are on the ballot, because we know that when we have somebody on the inside fighting for our community, that helps us hold legislators accountable who aren't as good on our issues.
Thank you, Jessica. Dana?
Thank you all. First, I want to thank the Carnegie for pulling us all together for this wonderful discussion on such a big night, 100-year commemoration. So many of you, at least some of them in the chat function, know me. I can see we have some students chiming in, Dr. Ramey. The Pennsylvania Center for Women in Politics at Chatham University is a nonpartisan center that's entirely dedicated to educating and empowering women for public leadership. And so we do this through a number of educational programs, as well as research and data collection efforts. I'll just share with you quickly 3 of our signature programs that some community members might be familiar with. One is our Ready to Run campaign training program, which has been running now for about 9 years, I want to say, in Pittsburgh, and I think 8 out in Philadelphia. And it's in the past, pre-COVID, it was a one-day, one-stop shop for campaign skills, right? Understanding how to do some fundraising, public speaking efforts, navigating the political party system. We try to package that all in a one-day program to make it accessible for lots of different folks. And we've had some success with that program, certainly. A number of alums have gone on to run for public office and win, but someone's raising their hand. So we've had, folks now serving in the state legislature that are alums of ours, both on the state Senate side and on the state House side. We now can boast that a member of Congress has come from our Ready to Run program. Judges, of course, school boards, township councils, a number of party officials. So we're quite proud of the work that we've done to disrupt, and I do mean disrupt, patriarchy here in the Pennsylvania political system. So we're pretty proud of that. Another program that you might be familiar with is the Elsie Hillman Chair in Women in Politics, where we try to raise the consciousness about women in politics through bringing in a really high profile person, woman in politics herself. So I'm proud to say that on October 21st, virtually, we'll be hosting this program. And of course, all of you tuning in today are welcome to tune into that Zoom. We have Governor Jennifer Granholm and Governor Susana Martinez, the first female governors of their states. And Governor Martinez is the first Latina ever in America to serve and lead her state. So there are two firsts coming together on opposite sides of the aisle to discuss the presidential election and what it means. And then lastly, the third signature program that I want to share with you all is our new leadership program, which is for undergraduate students. And that's from all across the Commonwealth. We pull about 45 students to come together for like a public leadership boot camp, so to speak. So we'll take them to Harrisburg to network them with women in all three branches of government, in addition to some professionalization skills. Students from that program have certainly gone on to serve in government and run for office themselves. So we're a little bit of, really focused on encouraging women to get into office. And Jessica Benham, you're not alone in that a lot of women who run, one of the first things they say is, oh, gosh, I really didn't think I was going to run, but here I am. But so to answer sort of the question and weave in what does the vote really mean for our constituency? It's really, the question is, well, what is a vote, right? A vote is a voice. A vote is a seat at the table in terms of responding to public policy that affects us all. And so if not for that vote and that voice, you are particularly left out of that discussion. And so oftentimes we talk a lot about descriptive representation and gender diversity in our governments, because just as Jess mentioned, that lived experience is so valuable and so important, and how that public policy actually impacts real lives on the ground. Descriptive representation oftentimes will lead to substantive representation. And so while we are focused on here on the vote, so much of what I do is focused on encouraging women identifying individuals to go even perhaps beyond that. So we have students that are part of my constituency, but also I consider any woman identifying individual in the Commonwealth to be part of the constituency. So the vote could mean a lot of different things for a lot of different people. And I'll end it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Dana. Could you just shout out your website?
Right. So if anyone's interested in participating in any of those programs, you could go to the pcwp.org. So Pennsylvania Center for Women in Politics initials, pcwp.org for registration.
Great. Thank you. We had a question about that, and we'll just take care of that right now. Monica, hello. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Monica Ruiz. I am the Executive Director of Casa San Jose. We're a nonprofit organization. We work primarily with immigrants that are coming here from Mexico, Central and South America. And we do anything from helping read mail to teaching them how to ride the bus to registering their kids in school to a lot of advocacy. And it's really hard to navigate the city, even if you speak the language. I remember moving here 12 years ago and I used to get so lost. I'm from somewhere where it's like more like a grid, north, south, east, west. This is definitely not that. So, so we try to do what we can so that folks can navigate the city better. And, you know, I think that for specifically the people that I work for, they can't vote. And so this is why voting matters, because your vote is helping people who literally don't have a vote, you know, don't have a seat at the table, get the issues that are important to them passed. And so people always ask, well, you know, why do you do voter engagement, you know, in education if your families can't vote? And I said, but they know people that can vote, right? And so helping them learn about the issues and being able to tell their stories to others so that others can bring that to the voting booth. You know, it's kind of like what you said earlier, that the gentleman who got a letter from his mom telling him to be a good boy, right? He wasn't thinking probably, you know, in that fashion when he was making the decisions that he needed to make, but he got a message from his mother. And in this case, it could be a message from your neighbor. It could be a message from somebody that works with you, or, you know, anything, just really trying to get their voice to matter.
Thank you so much. And Ciora.
Hello. Yeah, thank you again, Carnegie, for having me. It's a pleasure being with you all this evening. So my name is Ciora Thomas. I am, excuse me, the founder and director of Sisters PGH. We are a trans and non-binary led nonprofit organization in Pittsburgh that serves our community with an array of different resources. One of those being at our community center located at 2014 Monongahela Avenue in Swissville, where our community members are able to access us for an array of different resources, whether that's medical, physical, mental health, mentioned that, housing. We have different programs and groups that we offer, like Brothers PGH, that focuses on our transmasculine population, transmasculine, non-binary identified population in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. We have our program Grow to Succeed, which focuses on trans and non-binary recovery, those that need access to services of recovery, whether that's alcohol or narcotics recovery. That's a fairly new program. And we also have Project T, where we offer direct housing for our homeless, trans, and non-binary community members that are suffering from homelessness or trying to access shelters that are not affirming to their being transgender and non-binary. So I'm also the co-vice chair of our Pennsylvania Commission on LGBTQ Affairs, and we do a lot of work there. I'm very thankful for the team we have on that commission in the governor's office. And so voting, it matters to me because it's literally life or death for our communities around in our state, in our city. You know, Black trans women are being murdered almost every single day in the state, in the country, you know, and this is something that calls for action for us to be able to vote, while also having candidates that we can vote for that are going to have the interest of our communities.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Ciora, while we have you on, maybe I'll kick the next question to you first. You know, we've all been just talking a little bit about why voting matters. Some of you have talked a little bit about gender equity within voting, but if you could each just maybe take a little bit of time to talk about, you know, specifically, why does gender equity matter when we're talking about voting in the communities that you're working with, for you personally? Anything you'd like to comment on? Go ahead, Ciora, if you'd like to go.
Yeah.
We started talking a little bit about, you know, why women, particularly why trans women.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we've already been mentioning, it's very important to have representation of our different intersections of women, you know, and making sure that we are not only empowering them to vote, but to also empower them into making sure, again, like as I mentioned before, that we have candidates that are in our best interest and there that are actually acknowledging that we exist in this world, considering that, it's been a man's world, and I use quotations, in those spaces. And when we start to add different intersections to these spaces, it's going to be very important that we are looking at it with that equity lens, within communities. So.
Yeah, thank you. Monica, how about you? What do you think about gender equity? Why is that so important?
I mean, agreeing with everything Ciora just said, and also just realizing, you've got people making decisions for us, and people that don't look like us are making decisions for us. And that's what kind of got us in the situation where we're in right now. And that's not how it should continue. Our rights are being violated all of the time, or we're losing our rights left and right. And so again, as long as there are people in power that don't look like us and represent us, it's going to continue to happen.
Dana, anything you want to add? I know you could talk about women and voting and politics all day, every day, but gender equity for you, yeah.
Yeah, so for me, sadly, right or wrong, we live in a pretty gendered world. And so when you take a look at most public policy issues, so many of them are indeed gendered. I mean, you take a look at the minimum wage in the state of Pennsylvania, we know, in fact, that women would indeed have a great boost out of an increase in terms of lifting up that minimum wage to make it more of a living wage. And therefore, you're not just lifting up the woman, you're lifting up a family. And so there's so many stories, right, like that. We know that voting matters because of increasing paid leave, whether it was, for caregivers in terms of young children or caregiving for an elderly parent, that's on the ballot. Transgender rights and protection is on the ballot. All of these issues tend to be rather gendered. And so historically, women have sort of been on the ballot, so to speak. And so, so for all of those reasons, I mean, you're voting for public policies, you're not just voting for a particular candidate. And so like Ciora is saying, you have to make sure that your candidates too line up with what you care about, what your values are. Reproductive rights, right, is another one. And so for all of these reasons, I want to make sure that the students on my campus are fully enfranchised, no matter what happens during this era of COVID, on campus or off campus. It's my job to make sure that they have access to the ballot.
Great, thank you. Jessica, what about you?
Well, for me, equitable representation matters because we legislate from our lived experiences. And so it's critical that we have elected officials that are reflective of the population that they serve. It's not easy for me to run for office right now when I know that there are members of the Pennsylvania state legislature who think that COVID isn't a big deal when it only impacts people with pre-existing conditions like me. It's not easy to want to run to take myself in that space. Now, it's not easy for me as a queer woman to run knowing just how homophobic many of my potential future colleagues are. And yet, having somebody like me, especially in the middle of a pandemic that is disproportionately impacting people with disabilities, disproportionately impacting LGBTQ people, is critical, because I can take my lived experience and legislate from that. It's also critical to have people whose lived experience is different from mine, because we also know that the pandemic, for example, is disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities as well. And so it's not just important to elect people like me. It's important to elect people with a whole variety of lived experiences. It's not okay that in 2020, I'm going to be the first woman to represent the 36th House District if I win in November. It's not okay that I'm going to be the first openly autistic state legislator in the state of Pennsylvania. It's not okay that I'll be the first out queer woman in the state legislature in Pennsylvania in 2020. I didn't run to be first or to make history. I ran to make a difference. And so I know that we have so far to go when it comes to equitable representation, because I'm looking and I'm saying, all right, if I win in November, the only thing that I can do is look back and say, who's not here yet?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I like that phrase. Thank you. And obviously what we're talking about tonight is a very long history of not only suffrage, but as Jessica keeps reminding us too about, getting women into politics. And this is a very long, unfinished story of people struggling for the right to vote. So I'm wondering if each of you could comment a little bit about what some of the barriers are that you see to voting in your neck of the woods. And Dana, why don't we start with you, since you do this work day in and day out and also working with students, but what are the barriers that we're seeing or that you're seeing?
Right, so given that I do work on a college campus, I can say talking to young people, I will say just the actual registration process is a barrier. You present a young person with some government forms and it is intimidating for many of them. And now my job, of course, is to make it accessible and much more easy for them to do that. And that's what my office does. But to answer your question, in terms of that immediate constituency, if I could wave a magic wand here today and just simply enfranchise and have everybody automatically registered to vote, right, I would do that right upon your 18th birthday, that's what happens. But certainly that's not the case. So one, just the actual registration, I would say, is an identifying barrier for young folks. And then of course too, there are some attempts to make that a little bit easier. I know like Oregon has automatic voter registration, but it's still tied in with your DMV. So you have to have that sort of official photo license. So there's that. So there's some improvement in some states. Voter suppression and intimidation is also quite real, and a lot of misinformation out there. So that is certainly a barrier. There's the act of consolidating polling places in some locations, thereby creating very long lines that we may have visually seen in the primaries occur. And that's what so there's the actual act of consolidating and the long lines and the malfunctioning machines. And then there's the media reaction to it, right? Capturing it and broadcasting it, which to me also is a way in which to sort of suppress those voters, right, from coming out because, oh, look at what you're going to be presented with. Those who may have tuned into the Democratic National Convention last night saw former First Lady Michelle Obama talking about this very thing. And she was saying, pack a lunch when you go to the polls this year in 2020, folks. But we shouldn't be we're America. We shouldn't be asking folks to pack a lunch or a dinner to be able to go vote, right? That's a problem. That's a barrier. So those are some of them. In Pennsylvania, certainly we now have that no excuse mail-in ballot option, which I think a lot of folks are going to take advantage of this general election cycle. But again, you have to go through many steps in order to receive that ballot and all by certain deadlines. So you can follow those steps. But if you're asking Dr. Ramey for barriers, while that was an effort to, I think, increase access to voting, there still have a number of steps that you must employ in order to gain access to the ballot. So those are all some of the barriers that we sort of face in my office, particularly when messaging to a younger population.
Yeah, thank you. Ciora, what about you? What barriers are you seeing?
I'm seeing a huge barriers in even having the interest to vote, even having the interest to pay attention who's running for office, paying attention to legislators, paying attention to candidates. And this is because our trans and non-binary communities have been so disenfranchised and marginalized within community, and nothing has served us in a way that has demarginalized us. It's causing our communities not even to take interest in wanting to, participate. Not saying that, trans and non-binary people aren't taking interest in voting. We certainly are as community members, but particularly our Black and Brown trans and non-binary communities that are disenfranchised at a larger rate. We have to worry about getting housing, food, the basic necessities to live, which doesn't stop in a calendar year. November may not be a time that a trans and non-binary person is thinking of to vote. It's thinking winter is coming. I need to start focusing on finding somewhere stable to live. I need to start focusing on having funds to be able to maintain through the winter months. Another thing is being targeted and harassed, during polling. If they do go out to the polls and to vote, being harassed by other people there to vote. Let me see. And also, and I mentioned this earlier, candidacy. Having candidates that are fully invested in our communities and not saying, they're going to support our communities during their campaign. They need to have a history of supporting our trans and non-binary communities. And if they don't, it's not our fault as trans and non-binary people that these constituents who are running for office and have it invested into our communities. So we have to look at it in a few different ways when we're thinking about how people, intersectionally are faced with these barriers within community.
Yeah, thank you. Monica, what about you? What barriers are you seeing?
Yeah, so again, very similar to what Ciora said, but for us, there's a language barrier, right? And so it's really difficult when you don't have language access. We've had some folks that have moved here after Hurricane Maria from Puerto Rico. And for folks that don't know, Puerto Ricans are American citizens, but if they live on the island, they cannot vote for the president. But if they move here to the mainland, they can. And so for many of them, it was their first time voting and they had no idea what to do. They didn't know how to register. They didn't know anything. And then they get to the polls that day and there was an extremely racist security officer there that was just not assisting in any way. And it was terrible. And, we had made calls to let them know you have an uptick in folks that speak Spanish registering and they're going to vote in this specific area. And we had someone that was willing to be there that, for that day. And they said that they didn't have it in the budget and they wanted nothing to do with it. So it was pretty disastrous. And I can see things like that just continuing to happen.
Yeah, real barriers. Jessica, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so for folks with disabilities, there's a few things that I'm seeing. Certainly, much like Ciora was talking about, for trans and non-binary people with disabilities often feel disenfranchised from the political process. There's a saying that disability is a bipartisan issue, but it certainly doesn't always feel that way, because whether we're talking about the right or the left, the issues that people with disabilities care about are often ignored. So for example, we can talk about the current president trying to take away healthcare from people with pre-existing conditions, or we can talk about the fact that Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan didn't initially include some of the things that are incredibly important for people with disabilities with regard to healthcare. And so, whatever political ideology people hold, I think that folks with disabilities often feel unheard and like they don't have candidates that they can get invested in because those candidates aren't truly invested in disability issues. So I think that is a barrier to people even wanting to come out and vote. And then we get to the accessibility of the process. Loads of polling places are not accessible. And unfortunately, when accessibility is prioritized, it can be used to pit our access needs against the access needs of other people. So we can look at instances across the nation where polling places have been closed because they're not accessible. But the reason, that they were closed is that they're in primarily, you know, Black or brown neighborhoods. And so these issues are, rather than making the polling place accessible, they just close the polling place. And that's not okay. We want accessible polling places for everybody so that people don't have to leave their neighborhoods to vote, and so that people who use wheelchairs can get in the door, so that we have accessible needs for people who are blind or who have vision loss. And I think, you know, we can see most recently with the mail-in ballot process, which became so important under COVID. Certainly, you know, you have to fill out the detailed paperwork, but there wasn't initially a process for people who were blind to be able to fill out the ballot themselves, because you have to do it by hand on paper. And so if you are a blind person who, because of COVID, does not want to go to your polling place to vote in person on the accessible machine, you had to have somebody else fill in your ballot for you, assist you. And that's not how voting is supposed to work. And it took a lawsuit actually from Disability Rights PA for the state to say, okay, we will have a process where you can be emailed a ballot that you can fill in on the computer, print out, and mail in. But even so, you know, that is still not the most accessible process for people with disabilities. And so it's, I think, important when it comes to thinking about the barriers that everybody faces when it comes to accessing voting, that we don't further marginalize communities that we're not necessarily thinking about.
You know, and as all of you are talking about these very real barriers, right? And we're seeing these right here in Pittsburgh. All of you are giving these incredible examples, whether it's ID laws, closing polling places, the lack of accessibility, all of bullying, harassment, violence, all of these issues are gendered, right? There's gendered aspects to almost everything each of you has just mentioned. And undoubtedly, anytime you try to disfranchise a group of people, it will almost always disproportionately impact women, in part because women make up the majority of voters in every demographic. So if you're going to disfranchise elders, you know, there's more elder women, students, right? Dana, we've got more students, women as students. So if you're going to enact these ID laws that make it harder to vote, you are de facto disproportionately impacting women, and almost inevitably Black and Indigenous people of color, right? And across the board, and other marginalized folks. So as you were all talking about these barriers, I think the one that I didn't hear any mention of was gerrymandering. And of course, Pennsylvania is notorious for its incredibly gerrymandered districts, efforts to undo that now. But that has absolutely had an impact as well as a barrier to vote. But I just want, as we're thinking about sort of the gendered impacts and these barriers that you all brought up, if I could hand you that magic wand that Dr. Brown just mentioned a few moments ago, that she wishes that she had, that she could wave, you know, what are some of the things that we should be doing right now to ensure the right to vote for the folks that you're working with? You know, what needs to happen? And maybe as we're talking about this too, what can people in the audience do? So Jessica, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start, and I'll tag in to start with gerrymandering. I think one of the things that we desperately need is an independent redistricting commission that is comprised of citizens, you know, so that elected officials are not choosing their voters, because so often that's what happens. Yeah, I joke that this district that I'm running in looks like one of those lions on heraldry. It's very funny looking. And, you know, there's a part of it that looks like a claw. It's very weird looking. And it's not that way because it's prioritizing neighborhoods or, you know, communities of shared interest. It's that way because it's gerrymandered. And so that's something that we can definitely do. I think expanded opportunities for early voting, same-day voter registration, ensuring that it's much easier to apply for and access a mail-in ballot. You know, there's lots of things that we can do to both expand and protect the right to vote.
Monica, what would you like to see? If I handed you that magic wand, we'll just pass the magic wand around. Here you go.
Yeah, definitely agreeing with everything that Jessica just said, but also really getting information out to folks, like the importance of voting, education on, what's at stake, what people are, what people stand for, a lot of, nonpartisan work, whatever it is, but just really hitting communities so that people understand the importance of voting. Because somebody mentioned it earlier, I think it was Ciora who said that a lot of the folks that we are working with don't see the importance of it because they have just been on the end where it doesn't matter what party's in office, they're not getting their needs met.
Thank you. Ciora, here's your magic wand. What would you like to do with it?
Before I get into that, because I wouldn't be remiss if I didn't mention in your last question, I didn't mention homelessness. And I didn't mention our homeless communities having access to voting, and that's a huge barrier. Trans and non-binary people are chronically homeless as well. So even offering an option of a mail-in ballot is non-existent for someone who does not have an address. So I just wanted to touch on that really quick. So if I had a magic wand, I would try to do a lot of things with that magic wand. I've been sticking on this evening, focusing on, having candidates that, are for our community, to have us want to come out to vote, that actually invest in our community, or not giving us lip service about, during their campaign about what they're going to do for our communities. I mean, I pay very close attention to what goes on. I read, I educate myself on, particular candidates that are going to be serving our communities, and I share that information with those that want to receive that information. And at that point, is their decision to make their decision on what they want to do with their vote. So I would never shame anyone for, their decision for not voting. So I would definitely make it more real, per se. Make it more real, where we were actually having results, particularly for our extremely marginalized community, and spaces where spaces where the education of trans and non-binary people was already filtered through there. So we're not going through there, again, as a guinea pig community, which is a term we use, whereas people aren't used to dealing with our communities. So we turn into a guinea pig situation. Let's try it out and see what happens. And that causes harm to our community. So I would try to fix that, and, work with those that I felt fit to work with, to get that education and support anyone who wants to learn more, about our trans and non-binary communities during these type of processes, because November is always a crazy month, and making sure that everyone has the right education on how we're affected and what that looks like when everyone else is having their decisions and having their thoughts and feelings around what's going on, that we are a whole community that, has ours too.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing up the barrier of homelessness or housing precarity. You and Monica both mentioned, just sort of life factors. I'm not sure anybody mentioned, the fact that lots of people don't get the day off to vote, right? Which is another barrier that people experience in this country. Perhaps mail-in voting will help with that, but as Ciora just pointed out, not if you don't have an address. So some really very real barriers. All right, Dana, I'm passing your magic wand back to you. You have the magic wand back. What would you like to do with it?
Well, yes, with my magic wand, I would love to have, yes, like an election day holiday, truly. So that way shift workers, different folks would have access. But again, still just truly giving everyone truly the right to vote, and removing that barrier of registration. I just think that would be so helpful for so many different constituencies. Even in rural America, we know that we have access issues, not just in the city. And so I don't necessarily want to leave them out. But in terms of caring about voting, because that's certainly one that speaks to me too, in terms of the population that I serve. And this is certainly one, I think, that's like the age-old question, right? How do you get folks off the fence, or like, in the trenches with you? And I'm reminded don't lose me just yet, of a scene in Iron-Jawed Angels, which is this HBO movie. I know it's an HBO movie about the suffrage movement, particularly Alice Paul. And there are some things that are right about it and some things that are not so right. But there's this moment, there's this scene, there's this scene that is sort of based on a true life. In like 1910, 1911 in New York City, there was this raging fire that sort of decimated this garment factory, and over 100 women garment workers were killed in this fire in New York City. And a number of those garment workers, right, they're immigrant women, women of color. So there's this scene in Iron-Jawed Angels where there's an activist, a suffragist, who's trying to implore these garment workers to join the fight. And they're concerned about their jobs and taking care of their families. And it was just supposedly after this big fire, right? So they are aware of it. And the one woman says to another woman, "A vote is a fire escape. It's your life." For these garment workers, a vote is a fire escape. A vote is a fire escape. And so for so many different populations, a vote is a fire escape. And so I think sort of like sharing and being vulnerable, which all of you are doing tonight, but sharing and being vulnerable about how important these public policies are, thinking back to of how the personal is political and the political can be personal, right? So all these vulnerabilities lead us to the importance of voting. But I just love that movie, and 100 years, it seemed like the time to kind of bring it up.
And Alice Paul, Dana loves Alice.
I do. She's flawed, as all these women are. They're all flawed, but yeah, if I had to choose a character, I'd go with her.
And I'm glad to hear you talking about the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Very important. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I wish that, this really was a magic wand that we were passing around, because I think these were all super effective ways of addressing these barriers. And one thing I'm hearing consistently is, that these are real. This isn't just a sidebar issue or something that we sort of collectively made up in our subconscious, right? These barriers are very real. They really are impacting voters. And in a lot of ways, they're very intentional. So I think, if I could take the magic wand back, it would also be to help people really understand the intentionality behind some of these efforts to disfranchise people. So I think it's going to take a lot of work, resting on the shoulders of a lot of those giants that have come before us to dismantle some of these efforts that are before us. We do have a question from the audience. I can see it in our Q&A. So I'm going to turn now, if others who are watching out there wish to submit questions, you can do that in the Q&A feature, and I will try and field a few of those. And we have just a few more minutes before we will wrap up. But we did get a question about sort of the substance of voting. Somebody's asking us if we're thinking about the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, which of course was passed but not ratified by the states back in the 70s. It failed to be ratified, unlike the 19th Amendment. There have been multiple pushes over the years to, in fact, it has appeared and been presented back into the legislature every year and has not yet passed. So our audience member is asking what parts of the Equal Rights Amendment maybe need to be addressed or updated. Are we still talking about the ERA in our communities? Would the ERA specifically make it better for women, trans women, NBs, women of color? Is this something that anybody in this group is talking about? And feel free to jump in if this is something you'd like to comment on.
I can somewhat comment on it. I remember just in Virginia did indeed ratify the ERA rather recently, I think perhaps in January.
Yes.
Right. And so then there became this conversation of what now, what will happen, because the timeline I don't think has officially been extended by Congress.
Right. It expired. So did that matter that they passed?
Right. Was it more?
And one of the states voted yes and then voted no later. So
yeah. So this, that's the thing. So, political scientist, but not a constitutional law scholar at all. It's hard for me to answer, but I think that the question's still out there. And I would say this, depending upon how the 2020 election goes in terms of who serves in those seats in the United States Congress come January 2021, I think it could be a relevant issue again. What I'm saying is I cannot necessarily anticipate, let's say, a Republican Senate, because I'm not even sure if I'm assuming it would have to pass both chambers again to extend the timeline. But I can't imagine that Mitch McConnell would support such an effort. And so I think that's a question unknown to, depending upon what this election does, because we did just have Virginia do that very recently. So I think it is a question.
Anybody else have thoughts about a renewed push for the Equal Rights Amendment, obviously related to what we're talking about in terms of protecting rights across the board? And we have a number of other comments, so if nobody wants to comment on that, I'll jump on to some of these others. I see there are a couple of folks who made very important comments in the chat feature about different types of workers and labor, and whether or not, specific measures like a voting holiday, right? Would that help retail workers, restaurant workers, people who typically do have to work on those holidays? So, just reminders that one of our magic wand answers probably alone is not going to be the solution. And that, if we're not thinking specifically about work and different types of work, that we're going to miss out on groups of people. Monica, we had a question for you. One of our audience members says that they were floored by your comment that Puerto Rican voters are not able to vote at home in the presidential election, and somebody is wondering if you can elaborate on that, and they're wondering, is that true of other countries and territories like Guam? What does being a territory mean vis-a-vis, is it about citizenship? Can you tell us some more?
Yeah, so Puerto Ricans are citizens, they're American citizens, but they cannot vote in the presidential election, and the other territories cannot either. Guam, and there are some other ones that cannot. The only territory, or like DC is the only thing, like the District of Columbia that can vote. But yeah, no. So I mean, there's talks about Puerto Rico becoming a state, and those types of things that are happening right now, but they've been in talks for a long time, and there's plenty of folks on each side that either would or would not want Puerto Rico to become a state, but that's a whole different topic for a different day. But yeah, they don't have that right unless they move here to the mainland. And it's disgusting because that's again, people making decisions for you, and that don't represent who you are.
Yeah, thank you. We've got another question here from an audience member, and I'm going to take this and broaden it just a little bit. The audience member is asking, what are some of the organizations that our audience could support? They're particularly interested in LGBTQIA organizations in the area that may be facing barriers, and what can our audience members do to support organizations such as your own? You can say your own. So if people are ready to hand over some cash, who should they be handing it over to, or their time, to help address some of these barriers? Ciora, I'm going to let you go first because I know you need to give out your web address and everything else.
Yeah. So firstly, you can visit our website at www.sisterspgh.org and check out all what we do within community or programs. And we're always looking for volunteers to come help. Well, we're doing a lot of virtual things because of the pandemic, but we have lately been having volunteers at the community center, just pulling things together. So when we do open, we'll be ready to fully open, hopefully soon. And yeah, we are always looking for support. We're very thankful for our community members that have been pouring into our cup, especially during this pandemic, which has been huge for us. Again, We are a trans-led organization. We are trans and non-binary people, which within itself is power within itself, because to have, you know, marginalized communities to be able to lead and provide these direct resources to our community is everything. So we accept any type of support to, you know, start going away with these barriers and actually demarginalizing our communities. So marginalization isn't a thing of topic and conversation. I know we're maybe a million years from that, but you know, the work we set to do today can set us up for amazing things in the future. So any support, you know, that you can support us with through our different programs, and it would be very appreciated. So.
Thank you. Monica,
Oh,
go ahead, Ciora.
I was going to say, pay attention to our LGBTQ state commission and the things that we are doing within the state, as far as legislation, as far as candidacy, as far as a whole bunch of things. We are the only commission like this in the entire country. So it's very important to pay attention to our LGBTQI commission for the state, so we can be taking in your concerns, you know, as community members, and bringing that to the state. I do that a lot. You know, when I hear things within our trans and non-binary communities of Pennsylvania, I'm always listening, and I'm taking that to our commission, to the governor's office, to our executive director, and seeing what we can do about that on a state level. So yeah, please pay attention to, you can find us on Facebook right now. We just have a Facebook page, just Pennsylvania Commission on LGBTQ Affairs.
Thank you for that, Ciora. And Ciora, of course, is also the one who managed to get the advisory board at the city level turned into a commission coming soon.
Yes.
To a city very near you. We'll have a commission. Thank you for that work.
Of course.
Monica, take it away. What web addresses do we need to know? What organizations should we be supporting?
In general, or is it under the LGBTQ?
Well, you're welcome to answer that question too, but okay. I wanted to broaden it and let everybody give a shout out, because I know you're all working on, you know, important things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, you know, definitely any of the organizations that are here on this panel. I've had the pleasure of working with Ciora and learning so much from her, and just seeing the work that she does on the ground, day or night, it doesn't matter. And I have so much respect for you. Thank you so much for everything that you do. And you know, I'd be remiss to not talk about CASA as well. You know, we're doing a lot of voter education. We're trying to get the folks that have relocated here from the island registered to vote. It's really difficult. A lot of the, they don't have their birth certificates. They were ruined, they were damaged. A lot of these offices, government offices, haven't opened yet, you know, and so it's really, really difficult to get that information over here. And again, they're living like in Lawrence County, where there's like nobody that speaks Spanish. So it's lots of trips over there trying to get the things that they need. It's just a lot of work, Go to Casa San Jose's website. You'll see everything that we're doing. It's www.casasanjose.org, and check us out. I'm sure there's plenty of things that you'll like to do there. Thank you.
Thank you. Dana, anything we should know about from your neck of the woods, or other organizations that we should be supporting?
Well, there are so many that are worthy, particularly in the area. But if we're just focused on voting tonight, I mean, I definitely would check out Fair Districts PA, going back to the discussion of gerrymandering and the intersection of gender, and adding in the candidates piece. We know from the research that gerrymandering is gendered, not just from the voter perspective, but also in terms of candidates. Women candidates do tend to do better in terms of election outcomes when they are open seats. And oftentimes gerrymandering, if done, you know, properly, without sway or influence, can oftentimes create more open seat opportunities. And so for that, we know that that is gendered. And so I would recommend folks check out Fair Districts PA. And if you are interested in supporting educational efforts to increase gender diversity at large, you know, the Ready to Run campaign training program is nonpartisan, and we would gladly need that support going forward from all of you.
Great. And our colleagues at the Carnegie are dropping all these links down in the chat. So if you open up the chat, thank you very much, friends, for putting all of those links for us. Jessica, what about you? And then I'll let Ciora jump back in.
Yeah, I mean, I will always shout out the Pittsburgh Center for Autistic Advocacy. I'm not there anymore, but Corey and Opal are doing incredible work. Not only in terms of making sure that folks with disabilities have access to voting, but also that they have access to everything that they need to live a good life. So, I'm definitely going to miss being there, but I am incredibly proud of the work that they still continue to do.
Thank you. And Ciora, go ahead.
Yeah, 100% second that, Jessica. Totally a fan of Corey's work. They are amazing. So please check them out. I was also, if I wouldn't be remiss, just a few that I personally have been supporting. If you've been keeping up with what's been going on in Pittsburgh, as far as our marches, as far as Black Lives Matter, there are several organizations out there doing the work, like Black Ops, which is ran by Nikki Jo Dawson. There is Alliance for Police Accountability, APA, Black, Young, and Educated by Pittsburgh's Feminists for Intersectionality, Take Action Mon Valley, which is doing great work as well. We're actually partnering with Take Action right now to provide rent support through the CARES support in Pittsburgh. And there's a youth collective, a young Black youth collective in Pittsburgh that has been doing amazing work as well. So make sure you're just paying attention and supporting and pouring into their cups, when you can. Things are really happening in Pittsburgh and it's really heated up right now. So it would be very, very smart for us all to pay attention to it because it's going to have a huge influence on voting as well. So yeah.
Yeah, fabulous. Some really great organizations there. Ciora, I thought you were going to mention BPEP, which has been doing voter registration
Yes.
In the Black community for years and years. So big shout out to some folks. We got great youth activists in, Black, Young, and Educated, our youth organizers, and we've got folks who've been doing that work for a long time. We also had a shout out for Women for the Future of Pittsburgh from one of our audience members. So just some really great energy out there around these issues. I want to give each of our panelists just a moment to wrap up, if any last words. I always like to ask you, if we did this panel again, who's not at our table, who should be here? Who else would you like to hear from? Or any last words? I'll give you each a chance to do that, and then we will conclude our program. Jessica, do you want to go first?
Oh goodness, sure. When I think about, from kind of thinking about in terms of the context of the disability community who's not here, I think we need to include more people with intellectual disabilities in particular, because they are a group within the disability community that experiences disenfranchisement from voting frequently. There's a lot of people who don't even think that people with intellectual disabilities have the right to vote, and yet they have the same constitutional right to do so that any of us do. And so I think that it would be key, if we're gonna do this at some other point in time, to have somebody with that lived experience represented at the table. And I think to conclude, I would just say that this has been an incredible conversation. I am so grateful to have been invited to participate. Loads of good ideas for how to make not only voting, but living better. And I think that in the context of everything that we're experiencing right now, whether we're talking about the pandemic or we're talking about police brutality, it is so important for people who are disproportionately negatively impacted by not only those issues, but what has come to be everyday regular living in the United States, where we have a gap between rich and poor, between privileged and marginalized people, that it's only together when we're really listening to each other, especially when we are centering the experiences of people who are more marginalized than we are, that we're able to move forward to solutions. So I'm excited to hopefully have an opportunity to represent not only my district, but to fight for people who also share and don't share my lived experiences within and outside of my district, because when you're in Harrisburg, you're fighting for everybody in Pennsylvania.
That's terrific. Thanks, Jessica. And I want to get in that TARDIS with you and go to that world you just described. So I appreciate that very much. Dr. Brown, how about you?
So in terms of parting words, I just want to remind everyone that we do have the first woman of color to be nominated this week to a major party ticket. Senator Kamala Harris will be the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. And that is, in the political science world, a big deal. And so we haven't talked about that yet at all. And I thought for sure that that might inevitably come up. So I'm just kind of forcing it in there. I'm squeezing it in there to be the first Black woman, first Asian American woman nominated on a major ticket is a big deal. And in terms of parting words, I actually had thought about something else, but the conversation actually tonight seems to keep going around in terms of candidates. And so I will make my plea, as I normally do actually at the end of my Ready to Run program, is to seriously ask everybody who's tuning in and seriously ask all of the panelists to think about running for public office at some point. I don't necessarily mean right now, but maybe for you, the answer is right now. It comes and goes for different people at different times of their life. I want to remind everyone that leadership sometimes can be born, but most times it is learned and it is taught. It comes out of a space of passion. And I know I can tell at least all the panelists have a lot of passion tonight. And so we need your voice. You have a diverse voice. You have a lived experience that brings value and so much to the table. And so you have so many opportunities. And I just want one of those opportunities for you to consider running for public office, whether it is local office or a federal office. We definitely need to hear from you. And so whether it's the center has nonpartisan offerings to help support you, but maybe you need a partisan one. I'm happy to help lead you in that direction as well, if that's what you want to seek out. But I really do seriously ask that you consider to run for office at some point. Thank you.
Monica?
Yeah, so as far as folks that could be at the table, other immigrant and refugee populations, there are some other folks. Pittsburgh is becoming more and more diverse. We're still far away from where we need to be, but the population in Pittsburgh is steadily declining, and the only population that's growing is the immigrant population. So definitely engaging folks, specifically the ones that come as refugees, because they do, if they can't vote right now, they will eventually be able to have that right. And yeah, definitely we're not going to see changes until we get candidates, in these seats. We've got people who, I said this at Jessica's, when she had her kickoff, you've got these people that have been there for 10, 20, 30 years in these seats. And Pittsburgh has changed. Pittsburgh has changed in the last 5 years. So imagine what it was like, and they have these like good old boy attitudes, and they think that that's what's going to keep them in those seats. And it's not. It's we got to start to make some serious changes. I commend you, and I thank you very much, Jessica, and to everybody else who is running right now and trying to make a difference here, because if it weren't for you all, there's hope. There's hope. As bad as I see things all the time, there's hope, because I know that there's people who have their heart in this and really are about what they say they are. So thank you. I'd love to see Ciora run, but definitely,
let the recruitment begin.
But for sure, yeah.
And running is hard work. So thank you for the shout out to Jessica for doing that. For folks out there, if you have not gone through Ready to Run, I can also attest to what an amazing program this is. And Dr. Brown is absolutely incredible. Her team, it's just an incredible program. So please do run. And Ciora, you're definitely running for something. You've got a whole team here. But what would you like to tell us in closing words?
Of course, firstly, thank you for having me here today. It's been a pleasure to see you all again. And, I have been considering running. I'll put it out there. I have been considering running. It's something that's been on the forefront of my mind, trying to find my place and what would fit best for me. So that's something I've definitely been thinking about, but my organization must come first. My organization must be stable before I, make that leap. But that is something that I've definitely been thinking about. So thank you for calling that out, Monica. I've been called out on panels before about that. So, we'll see what happens. But thank you all again for having us, and I'll see you all in the streets.
Yeah, I want to just say thank you again to the Carnegie for having all of us this evening. This has been a tremendous program. I'm going to give one last plug to a program that Dana and I are both co-sponsoring on September 15th. So if you're interested in hearing some more about the history of suffrage, Dana and I are both sponsoring a really neat program with one of the premier historians of the suffrage movement, who's going to be talking a lot more about some of the themes that we touched on here this evening. So come on over to our website so you can learn more about that program. We'd love to have you. Thank you, Carnegie. We love you too. Wonderful colleagues. It's so great to have the opportunity to talk about these important issues. And great to see all of you, wonderful people. I hope it's in person next time or very soon. We'll all sign off and say good night. Thank you.
Yeah.